I'm Mitch Jeserich. People's Park in Berkeley, California was born out of the activism of the late 1960s and has been a place for activism ever since. It's also been a place of struggle. The land is owned by the University of California that purchased it in the 1950s. And ever since, it has been a place of struggle between the university that desires to turn the land into some kind of development over the years and the activist who wanted to remain a park and now a historic park. In the late 1960s, California Governor Ronald Reagan used the Highway Patrol and the National Guard to try to evict the activists from the park, and that resulted in months of unrest. Today, the university is once again trying to reclaim the land in order to build student housing. And once again, throngs of people have taken to the park and to the streets around it to try to stop it. Today, we are going to be in conversation about the history of Berkeley's People's Park. My guest for this is Harvey Smith. Harvey Smith is a member of People's Park Historic District Advocacy Group. This group is part of a lawsuit that has temporarily halted construction at the park, even though the University of California has pledged to continue construction this summer. Harvey Smith is also the author of the book, Berkeley and the New Deal. Harvey Smith, a very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Mitch.
What was striking to me, Harvey, as I was preparing for our conversation about the history of People's Park in Berkeley, is the struggle that you are going through right now to try to preserve this park is a struggle that has been around the park ever since the beginning.
Yes. What's interesting about People's Park, we just a couple months ago got People's Park placed after couple of years of work and application. People's Park was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. So it's comparable to other sites that are on the National Register, like the Woodstock site in New York, like Kent State. But what's different about People's Park compared to those two sites is that those sites are commemorated for what happened over 50 years ago there. And People's Park is ongoing. It's been an active site. So the things that it's been commemorated for that goes back to 1969 and the years following are still happening. It's part and parcel of the community. And in fact, people come from all over the world to Berkeley asking, where's People's Park?
It's interesting. So the University of California bought the land that People's Park is at in the 1950s. My understanding of that is when it bought that land, it actually was homes, and that the University of California used eminent domain to bulldoze those homes. And then after it did that, it just sort of lied dormant until it was claimed as a park in the later 1960s. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. I was a student at Berkeley. I came from my last year at UC. I started at UCLA. I was there for a year and 2 years at Santa Barbara and finished up here at Cal, which was easy to do back in those times. So I remember that block vaguely because it was like any other block in Berkeley. It was homes. And then I remember the destruction. And I remember the muddy lot that was left there. So that UC purchased it, and my understanding it was from Regents funds, and those Regents funds actually, some of them, or maybe most of them, came from student fees. So the fact is that students were actually involved, and students have always had a voice about the park. And have been concerned about the park from the beginning. But yes, that was a block that was demolished. Like a lot of Southside, the university developed a plan in the 1950s because post-war, there was a lot of expansion in the university, GI Bill, a lot of people came to Cal as well as other universities, and the university developed a plan. And so a lot of that construction came out of that plan, and big swaths of the South Side were cleared. This was kind of the last spot that was cleared, but there were political motivations too, because the year is 67. and the destruction happened in 68. So, what I should talk about is the context, because we just can't start with the park, because there's a political context that the park actually was born within.
Well, tell me about that context.
Well, you can go back. You can go back all the way to the 50s and Brown versus the Board of Education. So, beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, people students were involved in the Civil Rights Movement. We could jump ahead to some of the demonstrations that occurred in the Bay Area that students were a part of. House Un-American Activities Committee was in the Bay Area. Students protested, and then go to 1964, the free speech movement. And Mario Savio and many of the others involved in the free speech movement were also involved in the civil rights movement. So that was happening. The university was very much obviously aware of all that activity, and not necessarily supportive. You had professors, of course, that were supportive, but the administration as a whole looked askance at a lot of that. Free speech movement in 64, 1967 stopped the draft movement because the war had started. The Vietnam War started in 1964. So by 1967, it was sort of the height of the anti-war movement. Stop the Draft Week occurred in October of 1967. People marching, from Berkeley all the way to Oakland for 5 days. I participated in that. I was there. That's another story. And then earlier in the year in 67 was, at this point, the hippie movement, although it wasn't labeled hippies until later, until the Summer of Love, that was 67. But the human being occurred in Golden Gate Park in February of 67. So you start to picture the times, a lot of activism on both civil rights and on the war in Vietnam. And then this growing movement, this countercultural movement. The arts were heavily involved. And it just wasn't Berkeley. It was, 68 was a really big year all over the planet, Paris, Prague, you name it, things were going on all over. It was kind of a period of an awakening. So all this activism, all this counterculture movement, that was the milieu that People's Park was born out of.
Well, so a main place for people to gather in Berkeley before People's Park, I guess, was Brow Plaza, sort of right in the heart of UC Berkeley. Why do we then get the creation? What causes the creation of People's Park, and when does that happen?
Well, I think it gets back to some of that creativity of the time. People saw that this muddy lot with abandoned cars and sort of an ad hoc parking lot also was just sitting there. It was a mess. The university had torn down homes, and a lot of students, had lived in those homes. It was low-cost housing. Housing wasn't what it was. I guess maybe I should give another indicator of what the times were like. As a student at Berkeley at that time, I paid no tuition. So keep in mind, tuition now at Berkeley is over $14,000 a year. So the only thing I paid was a fee of $33 a quarter. That means $99 a year. So truly public education. Okay. So and housing was, of course, now if you buy university housing and board, it's another $14,000 a year. So Berkeley was a livable place. Going to the University of California was possible, for a low-income family. So the housing that was in People's Park was sort of part of that context too. So anyway, so the houses were destroyed. It was a mess. people were thinking something should be done. Why should this muddy lot be sitting here? And Michael Delacour, who's still here in Berkeley, got the idea. He communicated that to other people. Stu Albert wrote a piece in the Berkeley Barb suggesting that people gather and transform the muddy lot into something beautiful, a park. So that was the impetus to get it rolling. And so hundreds of people turned out to accomplish that.
The Berkeley Barb was a radical local paper.
Yeah, we had lots of newspapers. We even had a daily in Berkeley. Can you imagine that? So now, we're down to just a few. We've got our online papers, Berkeley Side and Berkeley Daily Planet, and we've got the Berkeley Times. But there was a time when there were lots of papers.
So how quickly does it become a park? You mentioned how hundreds of people first come to the park with the after it was written about and after it was a call for people to assemble. What happens next?
Well, it was a matter of days, weeks. People worked, hundreds of people. Food was served in the park on the first day to support people, and it was I think a spirit of the times that created the park. People knew how to come together. There were groups like the Diggers that provided food and at other places in San Francisco, and so the idea of coming together to create something was in the air. And so the park, sod was planted in the park. There was eventually a children's playground was created, and it happened. I mean,
who created the playground? Who was running all of this? How was it organized?
Well, it was a very spontaneous thing. So the idea, was generated by Michael and Wendy, but like a lot of things of the period, people kind of decided together, what should be done. I don't think there wasn't a director. I've never seen a map. A map was created later of the park, but I'm not sure that there was a plan. And I think there was a lot of spontaneity and a lot of creativity that created the park.
How did the city and the University of California respond?
Well, it was primarily the university. The university, the Chancellor Haynes at the time, was not in favor of this. There was a back and forth between the university and the people in the park. They were, I think, people in the park would have liked to have worked, with the university. They would have liked to continue, but the university started talking about, well, we have to do other things there, and was not supportive. Although you had certainly, there were professors. One outstanding example is Sim Vanderin, who was involved with environmental issues. He was an advocate for the park and attempted to negotiate with the university and on behalf of the park folks.
What happened then later with Governor Ronald Reagan? Governor Ronald Reagan specifically made this something he was paying close attention to.
Yeah. Well, he ran on the slogan of cleaning up the mess at Berkeley, So, what was the mess at Berkeley? The mess at Berkeley was, people involved in the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement. It was counterculture. That was the so-called mess that he didn't like. And at this point, as we know, as has been revealed later, there was a lot of pressure from the governor on Clark Kerr, and a lot of behind the scenes activity. But the university, was not inclined. Chancellor Haynes was not inclined to support the park, and obviously not the governor. So once the university made the move, when it, there were negotiations that were going on up until into May of '69, but the university had said it would let the park community know what would be happening. There would be no surprise moves. Well, that wasn't true. So very quickly they moved in mid-May, and the few people that were in the park, were taken out, and a cyclone fence was erected around the park.
It's happened like 4 a.m, didn't it?
Yeah. So that's the kind of move that people are nervous about to this day. So at any rate, the fence was erected, and there was a tremendous reaction from all corners. And keep in mind, there was support for this because amongst the business community, amongst Telegraph Avenue, throughout the community, that people knew about the muddy lot. They knew it was a mess, and they could see that it was transformed into something else, something that could be used by everybody. So the reaction was there. The Berkeley police were involved, UC police, and then Alameda County sheriffs were called out. They showed up. At that time, they wore these blue jumpsuits, so they were known as the Blue Meanies. And so on Bloody Thursday, people were actually shot at, by the sheriffs, and people. One person was killed, another person blinded, many other people seriously wounded. And then Ronald Reagan called out the National Guard, and then a few days later, Berkeley, the demonstrators and Berkeley, was tear gassed. So students in school were tear gassed, people on the campus were tear gassed, and so the park was secured eventually by this brute force, and the fence was maintained.
This was on May 15th, 1969. This is what you refer to as Bloody Thursday.
Bloody Thursday.
Yeah. The man who was killed was named James Rector. What's important to know about him?
Well, he was a bystander. He wasn't a park activist. He was on a roof, looking at this, and people, that they're curious, and so this was not a guy demonstrating. He was just watching, and he was shot at, and he died.
I mean, it really says something. He's on a rooftop watching this, I think, yes, on top of a bookstore. And, yes. You'd have to, those are some wild shots to, I guess, have to reach up and get somebody who's elevated like that.
Yes. Now, I got to say, I was not here during this. I was a student. I graduated in 67. I was there for Stop the Drop. By 69, in March of 69, I was on the road. I was traveling. So I missed this. But when I came back, there was still lots going on that was very similar because the anti-war movement was at its height. So I witnessed the same. I didn't witness shootings like that, but the police would react. There was use of tear gas, and I was at that time a medic at the Berkeley Free Clinic, and also a street medic. So I remember, running from the police, hiding in doorways to avoid them. So this started this major action with People's Park, but it continued for a number of years, the police repression in Berkeley and other areas.
What is or what was the Berkeley Free Clinic?
Well, the Berkeley Free Clinic grew out of that time. It grew out and began also in 1969. And the idea that there was, since the Summer of Love, since 67, there were a lot of young people on the streets. People came from other parts of the country, to the Bay Area, to San Francisco, to Berkeley. And some people needed medical care, and it wasn't being provided. And the Free Clinic was part of a whole community clinic movement that started at that time, and the height of was in the 1970s, where clinics were established all over Alameda County and, other places too. But at one point, there were 13 community clinics in Alameda County, which included the Berkeley Free Clinic, the Berkeley Women's Health Collective, the Black Panther Clinic in South Berkeley on Adeline, clinics, the La Clínica de la Raza, Native American Health Center. So again, 13 clinics all over the county. The issue was that healthcare for all those communities was not adequately provided. So like People's Park, the community clinic movement, activists stepped up to provide what was not being provided.
And then the National Guard would stay at the park for the several weeks that would follow? I mean, there's some really amazing photos of the National Guard there surrounded by a lot of young hippies with flowers.
Yeah, and one photo I think of also is the National Guard, a couple of troopers standing there reading the Black Panther newspaper, because the Black Panther Party came out and distributed newspapers to the guardsmen. So yeah, they were there, and they were young people. Some of them were probably sympathetic to the cause, but that was their assignment.
How long did they stay, and what happened afterwards?
Well, the fence stayed up. I think the guard was there for probably a few weeks, and then the fence remained until 1972. So that's another key landmark date, because the people obviously were not happy, with the fact that there was a fence around the park.
So it's fenced off. It's not being used at this time between 1969 and 1972.
Yeah, and there were protests during this time, and but I think it was obviously a thorn in the side of Berkeley. Not only the park protesters, because people in Berkeley remembered what happened in '69. The city being, helicopters flying over, spewing tear gas over the city. So, it was there with the fence. And then in one of the anti-war demonstrations, it was a demonstration against the bombing of the Haiphong Harbor. That Dan Siegel, then student body president, suggested take down the fence. And sure enough, the demonstration that was up on Sproul moved to the fence and tore it down. So this was the renewal, began the renewal of the park. The park was reestablished, and some replanted the native plant garden. That effort was led by David Axelrod, who is now an attorney and trying to also defend the park. David Axelrod worked with he was a student, so he was working with people on campus to establish the native plant garden. And also the famous botanist up at the Botanical Garden in Tilden Park. That's James Roof. And so they did an incredible job with the garden. I remember walking through the garden later in the late 70s with my young sons and looking at this garden and seeing the plants identified. And that was on the east end. And also trees were planted at that end of the park, representing the different zones of California. So we have the park on that end is full of native trees. There are 3 trees in the middle of the park that are what we call heritage trees, because they were there when the houses were there. So there's a redwood, incense cedar, and a palm tree that are, all 3 of them are huge and still, predates the park. And then on the other end of the park, that's traditionally been devoted to flower gardens and vegetable gardens, fruit trees, and also redwoods. There's the Fred Cody Grove. I should mention the Codys, because the Codys, again, part of the culture of the period. Cody's Bookstore, which is no longer there.
But iconic bookstore for many years.
Many years. And the Codys were very much involved in what was going on at the time in Berkeley.
This is Letters and Politics, and today we are in conversation about the history of Berkeley's People's Park. Our guest for this conversation is Harvey Smith. Harvey Smith is a member of People's Park Historic District Advocacy Group. He's also author of the book Berkeley and the New Deal. Harvey Smith, I think when we think about a city park, we think about a park that is run by the city itself. Is that how People's Park works, or is this more of kind of an organic community park that people voluntarily contribute to? Or how would you define how this park operates?
Well, the way it has operated is on a volunteer basis, people maintaining the park. It goes back to those days. For example, the native plant and tree plantings that David and others did. But it's also, it takes a lot of energy to keep a park going. You've got infrastructure, so people do a pretty good job, but it's always with resistance. That there are structures that have been put up in the park that have been taken out by UC. There's always been this tension and battle. So people can maintain the park. And they can do things creatively, but then you also have UC trying to destroy some of that creativity. Having this support of a park district is not a bad thing. Having support of professional gardeners like at the university or in Berkeley parks is not a bad thing. But for lack of that, over the years, people have volunteered to maintain the park.
That's pretty remarkable. Has it mostly remained a park from 1972 on? I mean, I know there's struggles in the 70s, 90s, and now, but has it mostly remained a park since it was reclaimed in 1972? Oh,
sure. I mean, it was reclaimed, and then there was part of the park on the western side that was still kind of an ad hoc parking lot. And at one point, UC got the bright idea that they were going to pave it over, and it would be a paid student lot. Well, that was actually installed briefly, and then the park activists tore it up, made embankments on each end of it with the asphalt that was torn out, and planted it, and that's where the vegetable and flower gardens are now, and a lot of mature fruit trees. So the park remains a park. It's 2.8 acres. There are some structures in it. The university did finally, after resisting efforts from park supporters to build bathrooms, the UC has put in this kind of concrete box of a bathroom structure, which is covered with murals. But the problem is that it's been very spottily maintained by UC, even though they put it in. And then there were the other famous attempts, for example, to install a volleyball court. UC has always tried to, in different ways, to reclaim, in their mind, the park. And so this awful idea of the volleyball court, which eventually they removed because it was little used. And of course, there was resistance to it.
And that was in the 1990s?
Yes. And it became known as Berkeley's biggest cat box. Every neighborhood cat knew where the volleyball court was. At any rate, and they did install basketball courts, so the basketball courts have actually been well used by everybody. The beach sand volleyball court, bad idea, but the basketball courts are well used. They were for a period for 12 years actually the site of the Midnight Basketball Summer League. So the park traditionally is been a park for everybody, for students, for the community, for people that really don't have a place to go. It's been a refuge. It's been a shelter. It's been a place of activity. The mime troupe is performed there. There's the free speech stage that was built in 1979. And then the university resisted. And then eventually there was a court order issued that guarantees that the free speech is allowed in the park and can take place there. So there's,
But but that was in question. There was a struggle over free speech.
Oh, yeah, well, over the stage, over whether people can gather in the park in the way that they have for decades. So it's a place that has hosted just innumerable cultural events, music events, political events, and so there's this very, very, very deep history that obviously should be preserved.
And now UC Berkeley, or the University of California system is attempting this summer to begin construction there of mostly student housing, some other things as well. Are they planning on building on the entire park?
No, they've slated that they would build on 1.7 acres, and that would.
It's over half.
No, it would build on 1.1 acres and leave 1.7. But the 1.7, if you look at the plans, it's a lot of hardscape. There is a little green in there. But it's not people's park. So many of the trees would go, the gardens would go. And then in their arrogance and insensitivity, they said that they would build a commemorative monument of some kind to the park. So that's pretty ironic that UC would take on that. So the plan, it's one project with four elements. It's the student housing, the supportive housing, the so-called green space that they were probably green space and hard space, and this commemoration. So the community is very much in favor of student housing being built. We know that UC has contributed to the housing crunch, and they're aware of it. I mean, of all the 9 of the UC campuses provide housing, 9 of the 10. UC has the lowest ratio of housing to students. This has been known for years. I was really impressed by a call that was placed to a program on KQED Forum months ago. And this guy calls in and he says, I was going to Berkeley. I got my acceptance letter in 1964. It said, "Welcome to Berkeley, but you're on your own for housing." So that goes back, over 50 years. So it makes you realize that you see the sort of dire housing crisis that they describe has been a known quantity for a long time. And so again, park folks are, in favor of housing. Just build it in an appropriate location. They have alternative sites. They've enumerated a number of them, 9 sites for housing. 2 of those, one is the project that is now being built at University in Oxford and People's Park, but there are other sites, and then some they don't even enumerate. We suggest, that they build just over a block and a half away. There's a earthquake unsafe parking structure, the Ellsworth parking structure, right there. It's 1.3 acres. So that 1.1 acres of project could easily fit into that parking lot. It's of zero historic value. It was built in 1961. under the 1958 building code. So for sure, it is probably a danger to people. So that would be the place to put this project. So, our question is, why save a parking lot and destroy a park when we could have both?
People's Park has been declared a historic site. Is that not, obviously that's not enough to save it?
No. The way it works, that you can get this historic designation, but that doesn't stop the university. And not much stops the university, because they're sort of an entity of themselves, to themselves. They're not bound by local zoning. They're not bound by, they don't pay, local taxes. And so, unfortunately, this doesn't stop them, although in the process, it's in court now under the California Environmental Quality Act. Historic resources have to be considered. Alternatives have to be considered. Now, UC claims that and particularly before the park got on the National Register, they would minimize the historical merit of the park. And they would say that they can't, use another alternative. So the fact is, they have the alternatives. Why pick the most controversial one at the very beginning is our question. Build out on some of those other alternative locations, and then maybe, have a discussion about People's Park, but not right away, not first. The other issue is that Berkeley is incredibly underparked. It's always been underparked. Even though we love our parks, we don't have enough of them. And then the south side of Berkeley, where People's Park is located, is very, very dense. It's the densest part of Berkeley. And so a park serves a recreational function, and it can serve a cultural function, but it's also a refuge, in times of, obviously, in times of COVID, in times of pandemics, in times of fire or earthquake. You need open space, and there's a lot of high-rise dormitories on the south side. What happens if there's an earthquake? What happens if there's a fire? Where do people go? So the park serves that, that function also, as well as, look, do we have to remind people that we're in a period of extreme climate change. So to eliminate all those mature trees that are in the park, which is also home to numerous bird species, including red-tailed hawks and other species of birds. Why would you want to eliminate that? We need that. We need that little ecosystem during these times.
Harvey, some supporters of building housing at People's Park say that People's Park is no longer this warm, welcoming space that it was known to be, that there is a high crime rate that occurs at the park, and also that there are homeless encampments that have sprung up there.
Yeah, let me address that. Well, the homeless encampments over the last 2 years is a responsibility of the University of California. They claim in their benevolence they allowed people to camp in the park during COVID. On the other hand, they also use that fact to denigrate the park. It's messy, it's full of tents, there's crime there. Well, we actually did some research. There's a website that anybody can go to called Crime Mapping. And we focused on a 20-block area surrounding People's Park. And we discovered that we went back 6 months. We went from July 4th back to January. And People's Park accounts for 6% of the crime in that 20-block area, meaning 94% of the crime occurs outside of People's Park. So this is another fiction that the University of California wants to hammer home. They want to make people afraid of the park. We talked about the anti-war movement. It reminds me of what we used to hear back in those days. We had to destroy that village to save it. So this is the same thing. We have to destroy People's Park to save it. It just isn't true. And the thing about camping that is ridiculous also, for some of the court filings that we had to do, I went around about a week ago because the university was claiming that they have to erect a fence again around the park or else all the homeless people will move in. To their credit, they found housing, with the city. They committed funds to buy space, to lease space in a motel, the Roadway Inn on University Avenue. And they found places for everyone that was willing to go in the park. And so there are very few tents in the park right now. But they could have done that 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. They had that ability. So what I did for this court filing was I went around and took photographs of 3 parks: Ohlone Park, Civic Center Park, and Willard Park. And then 3 spots on campus: the Crescent on the west end, Eucalyptus Grove, and Memorial Glade. And open, green, grassy areas, no fences, but no tents. So the university controls People's Park. They are the ones that can say tents or no tents. They don't need a fence. They don't need a fence on campus. They don't need a fence in any of our parks. So this kind of another fiction about People's Park at the present moment, that there has to be a fence to keep people out. People go to the park, because it is a park.
And encampments at parks, city parks, is not a uniquely People's Park phenomenon.
No. We have seen tents during COVID at other areas, but the fact is, this is what the university. This is sort of university policy. If you allow tents, there'll be tents. If you don't allow tents, there won't be tents. And the crime thing, it's crazy. There's, you could say that because of if you use their logic, you'd have to say that, well, because of the sexual assaults and drug and alcohol crimes that are committed on Fraternity Row, that maybe we should demolish Fraternity Row and erect high-rises. It's the same kind of logic.
Harvey, your group, People's Park Historic District Advocacy Group, is, again, a part of a lawsuit that has temporarily halted construction at the site, but maybe only for, another few more days. The UC's University of California says it still intends to continue construction this summer, potentially even in the next few days. What's the latest on that?
Well, the stay is in effect. There is, UC has opposed it. There's an appeal process. So depending on the outcome of the appeal, or the actual hearing of the CEQA case, which begins on July 29th.
And what does that mean, CEQA case?
Okay, so the only way legally that you can stop this project, again, UC has great power. Okay. They can pretty much do what they want. That's how the park, the land was cleared, eminent domain. They have that kind of power also. So the only way that you can have any control over this project is through a California Environmental Quality Act lawsuit. And you have to show, and there's a whole CEQA process that went on for a couple of years, where the university, proposes the project, and there's different ways that you can object, to their proposal. They do this in an environmental impact report. And so a couple of the areas that have been focused on is, one, the enrollment issue, where they want to continue expanding enrollment, but housing lags behind that. So that was one of the areas that we opposed. And that gets complicated. There was a big to do around that when the Supreme Court actually supported our position, or that there were other lawsuits. So that really wasn't ours, but they supported the position that UC should limit enrollment until they catch up with housing. And again, that seems kind of logical, doesn't it? A lot of pressure is created. Students are actually homeless. Why not have some limits? So there was opposition to that. They got the legislature involved, and they sort of changed the requirements for the enrollment. But so we're focusing on that's part of it. But we're also focusing on the historic value and environmental value of the park, which again I think I've explained pretty clearly why the park is important. So it's a very involved technical process with lawyers reviewing this stuff. And so that case happens on July 29th. That will be heard in Alameda County Superior Court. So it seemed logical to us that if the whole project was going to be reviewed, why should the university be allowed to destroy People's Park before the court case actually happened? We also opposed the first project at University of Oxford, but the judge didn't order a stay or a temporary restraining order in that case. That project has gone forward. So in that project, 3 historic buildings were destroyed. One of them was formerly a rent-controlled apartment building. They got away with that. But with People's Park, we pushed and pushed for this stay because the merits of what they're doing will be decided beginning on July 29th.
Harvey, do you see this as part of a bigger pattern of what's happening in Bay Area life? And I guess I say this and ask this as someone who is from the Bay Area, has lived here the vast majority of my life, and how now we do have seen in the recent years a construction boom. And part of that has also been the demolition or the removal of places and sites that we always seen as part of the Bay Area culture and history. Do you see this as a part of that? Do you see that happening in the Bay Area?
Well, clearly. I mean, the university is a player here in Berkeley, and you only have to look at the data, to see the human impact, where during the 70s, the African-American community numbered about a quarter of Berkeley. And now it's down to, 7 or 8%. So the South Berkeley community is sort of the canary in the mine for all this. And so, yeah, we've seen these changes, but, I'm a student of the New Deal. So I always think about that period in the 30s and early 40s when there was a lot of development in the Bay Area, but it was public development. So, we got parks, we got schools, we got libraries, we got marinas, we got all this
bridges.
Yeah. And so now it's like the opposite. So it seems the real estate and development industry fully controls, what's going on.
It's all private now.
Yeah, private. And, what you were just saying, our beloved Shattuck cinemas, no more, and many, I mean, that's just one of many. So, it's part of a larger context and it's sort of the monetization and privatization of everything that is going on. We're now dissecting what Trump did on January 6th, but for 4 years, our country was controlled by a bunch of real estate scammers. There was Trump, there was Kushner, there was Wilbur Ross, Steve Mnuchin, all real estate scammers. So is it any surprise that has kind of continued, you know.
Harvey Smith has joined us for a conversation about the history of Berkeley's People's Park. Harvey Smith is a member of People's Park Historic District Advocacy Group, and he is the author of the book, Berkeley and the New Deal. Harvey Smith, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mitch.